Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this AMPO webinar. This is coming to us from our Active Transportation Interest Group, which is one of the 7 interest groups we have here at AMPO, helps us put together webinars, helps us find the great speakers and topics that we're able to share with you. So glad you're all joining us. I'm just gonna keep letting folks in from the waiting room. I'm Ellen Zaviska. I serve on AMPO staff as Transportation Planning Manager. And I'm going to go through one quick housekeeping slide before we get into our topic. So everyone should have their mic muted as they come in. Please leave that muted until the period for questions and answers. You are welcome, however, to submit questions or comments at any time in the meeting chat. We do record the webinar, and we also use the transcription from Zoom to put together notes. And we will share the notes and the slides within a week or 2 after the event. Ask you to please add your MPO or organization handle to your Zoom handle so we know where you're joining us from. And finally, just to acknowledge all the sort of weirdness that's going on in our transportation world right now. Hopefully all of you are getting AMPO's policy updates. We try not to inundate you, but there's a lot going on. If you're not getting those updates and you want to, please drop your email address in the chat and we can add you to that list. We're also holding a listening session tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern, where you can just share what you're hearing about what's going on. And we're going to use information from that as we communicate with folks in DC. So I will share the registration link for that listening session tomorrow afternoon, which will just be a wide open thing where you can share what's going on. So with that, our moderator for today's webinar is Liza Farr with the state of Rhode Island. That is, as far as I know, the only statewide MPO in the country. She's the supervising planner on the transportation team there. She manages Complete Streets Guide, Long Range Transportation Plan, Social Equity Platform, and she has her master's in city planning from MIT and her bachelor's from Claremont McKenna. And with that, I will ask Liza to introduce our topic and our speakers.
Thank you, Ellen. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about data collection methods for sidewalks and ADA accessibility. This comes from the finding that, sidewalk data and sidewalk quality data is a lot harder to come by than data that we use a lot at the MPO level on roads and bridges and public transit. And as we know, data is very powerful in identifying problems and finding solutions. So with the increasing focus on sidewalks, on ADA accessibility, the new PROAG standards, there's a lot of urgency in addressing this shortcoming within our data. So the webinar will highlight a tool called Project Sidewalk that uses crowdsourcing, and also an MPO in New York that has used a LiDAR tool for field data collection as well. So we'll be highlighting a couple of options, and I'm curious to hear more about those and about the attendees' experiences and questions as well. Next slide. So the first presenter we have here today is Dr. Yochai Eisenberg, and he is an associate professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and also an affiliated researcher with the Great Lakes Americans with Disabilities Act Center. He studies the way in which policies, systems, and environments impact community mobility, transportation use, and health among people with disabilities. He has also researched ADA transition plans, rideshare use and satisfaction, accessibility of environments, and is the research coordinator with the Transportation Research Board's Committee on Accessible Transportation and Mobility. So welcome, Dr. Yochai, and he will be the first presenter, but I'm going to present or introduce the second set of presenters here first. So today with us, we also have Jim Stack and David Stoss of the Genesee Transportation Council in Rochester, New York. Jim has been the executive director there since January 2016, and before that, assistant director, and overall has been there for over 30 years of transportation planning. And he holds a master's in public administration with the State University of New York and a bachelor's of geography at the University of Connecticut. David holds a bachelor's from Binghamton University and a master's in urban planning from the University of Buffalo. He is focused on the active transportation program, being the manager, where he continues to lead and support active transportation projects, as well as serving as the co-chair for the New York State AMPO Bicycle and Pedestrian Working Group. So welcome, Jim and David. And with that, we're going to start getting into our presentation, but I first want to launch our very first polling question for members of the audience to contribute to. So this first question helps get an idea of where you all are in the audience with your sidewalk data, both thinking about the presence of sidewalks and quality. So does your agency have a regional inventory of sidewalk presence and quality? Quite a few options here because I know it's often yes, kind of, and oh, it's too old or whatever it is. So please submit your responses here. We'll take just another 30 seconds or so to let you all respond. And as I predicted, we have a lot of responses coming in on that, like, oh, we have some of it, but it's not quite complete, or, we have presence, but we don't have quality. So definitely seeing sort of a mix of status where folks are landing. Give it just 10 more seconds here to get your responses in, and then I will be able to share the results with everybody. Okay, I'm going to end poll and share results. Hopefully you all can see that. So it looks like quite a few, again, have some of this data, but it's incomplete or significantly out of date. And then another big chunk, almost a third, do have data on sidewalk presence at the regional level, but not on the quality of that sidewalk, which is exactly what we are here to talk about today. So it looks like a lot of people that'll be interested to hear these options. And we also have a couple who are sort of in progress and working on it right now. So excellent work on that. And I think I'm just going to do one more poll before we get started, because of course, it's not just about the data, it's about what we do with the data. So I've just launched the second, wait, did I? Yes, I launched the second poll. This question is asking how your agency currently uses the sidewalk data that you have. And it is select all that apply, so feel free to select multiple. Gives us an idea, especially the presenters, what the use cases are, what we're actually taking this data to go forth and use, because that can really impact the type of data we want to focus on within this work. So I'm going to give it another 15 seconds or so. And anyone who has an other response, feel free to write it in the chat if you have another way that you're using this data. Be interested to see that as well. Okay, I'm going to end this and share. Okay, so vast majority that we do have here are using this data for project selection and prioritization. Following up with sharing it with other agencies, I assume a lot of times municipalities, transit agencies, things like that. And then somewhat fewer using it for safety and crash analysis, equity analysis, and grant applications. So an interesting spread, and will very helpful for our presenters as they share their information. Okay, with the polling questions done, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Yochai Eisenberg to share your screen and get us started on the first presentation.
All right, great. Thank you so much. All right, so excited to share with you today about Project Sidewalk and thinking about better data to improve pedestrian infrastructure accessibility. So this project is a Smart and Connected Communities grant, which is funded by the National Science Foundation, which, if you don't know, is kind of under attack these days, but our grant is still going, and we're excited and proud of it. And it has the word inclusive and accessibility in it, which makes it a target, but at the same time, it's important work that we all continue to stand behind. These are our great partners from University of Washington, who is the developer side of the project, and I'm focused on the applied side of what you do with the data and how you engage people and communities in using the data. And then we have several regional partners, including the MPO in Chicago, CMAP, and several other planning and disability organizations. So in my presentation, what I'll try to cover is kind of the why of focusing on pedestrian infrastructure accessibility, how to address this problem through ADA transition planning, and how Project Sidewalk is a tool to support better planning, as well as approaches to different ways to engage with Project Sidewalk, and some ideas for using Project Sidewalk for analysis, planning, and prioritization. So, first, just want to kind of highlight the urgency of the need for accessibility information. Showing a picture, and hopefully you could see there's a large elephant in the room, but clearly the people around this table aren't seeing it. And I'm kind of showing this picture and using this classic metaphor because it's still relevant when we think of this context of pedestrian infrastructure accessibility, where the problems with accessibility and the lack of progress to fixing them are the elephant in the room. There's an urgent need because, right, what's on the line is safety, independence, health, and our climate. The second part of this metaphor, of course, is you need to name it and then tame it, right? And the way you do that is by collecting data, is getting over that hump of the fear of looking at that elephant maybe, and to start collecting data. And Project Sidewalk is one of the tools. Our other presenters are going to share some other ones as well. Project Sidewalk is one of those tools that communities can use to name that elephant and start to tame it, start to address how do we use resources, how do we get grant funds that address this elephant. And it's also important because pedestrians with disabilities continue to experience barriers to using the pedestrian infrastructure. This is what we kind of find from social science research, is kind of a continuation of the encountering of barriers, such as construction zones, lack of connections to bus stops, and inaccessible, broken up sidewalks. Additionally, the other urgency that I think is part of the story that we don't want to look away from is lawsuits. They're another important indicator of the magnitude of the problem with accessibility. And at the same time, they're a form of disability justice, and that they're the way through the Americans with Disabilities Act that people can fight for their civil rights. And so what I'm showing here is lawsuits that started from 2000 to 2004 that were focused on the pedestrian infrastructure. Some of these were private lawsuits. In red and in blue are from a project called Project Civic Access that was done at the federal level to examine complaints that were occurring throughout the country. And then the next slide is showing, since then, from up to 2023, where we tracked both private lawsuits and Project Civic Access settlement agreements. And you see there's kind of a large increase, obviously, from the beginning of when we were looking at this. And I don't have the names of all the cities on here, but what I could tell you is that there are cities both large, medium, small, rural, urban, in all kinds of contexts. And essentially, again, show the urgency and consistency of the problem. Some of our other research examined ADA transition plans, and we did a systematic evaluation of local public agencies around the country, and found that only 13% of communities had an ADA transition plan, and only 13% of those met the minimum requirements for what should be in a plan. So essentially kind of low and ineffective planning. And then we looked at what the plans themselves shared about barriers, and found also that from their own self-reporting, 65% of curb ramps had barriers and 50% of sidewalks had accessibility barriers. So we're talking about a big magnitude of the problem. The elephant is, I guess, a big one. Key takeaway from some of this background research that we should think about when thinking about collecting sidewalk data and how it relates to planning, right, is that there's a lack of planning for ADA transition plans in the US. There's low quality of plans. We also found there was trivial involvement of people with disabilities, which I think is a important area that the planning community could clearly address in relation to sidewalks and ADA planning. What this means is that there's limited progress in removing barriers in the pedestrian infrastructure and a limited impact on community mobility and participation among people with disabilities, older adults, and several other populations as well. So the question to explore from here, I think, is, what are ways to address the elephant and make progress towards improving city accessibility? One of the challenges we have to look at in addressing that question is the differences between how cities look at this problem and how disability advocates look at it. So from the city side, right, there is this focus on compliance. They see the Americans with Disabilities Act and really are focusing on compliance. Often cities we've talked to want to fly under the radar and not know about problems. And that's been an issue with, starting off, wanting to start, wanting to have that data. There's a lack of knowledge and resources about how to get started. And it's an under-prioritized problem, right, among all the many things that communities have to deal with, until it isn't, right? Until people get so fed up that lawsuits are their only option. Whereas from disability advocate side, they want the changes. They want the changes yesterday. They want to share their lived experience and have it valued. And they also do have lawsuits as a tool to defend civil rights when advocacy doesn't work. So I think those are important contextual features to understand. Also want to highlight that, by working, closely with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and wanted to highlight how, they're really doing an amazing job, I think are an exemplar for MPOs about how they are addressing planning and thinking of ways of integrating it with other forms of planning and, kind of really prioritizing it as an issue that the region is focusing on. So shout out to any folks from CMAP here as well. Here's a map of what's been going on so far with Project Sidewalk, where in the Chicago region, community members through crowdsourcing have covered 703 miles, placed over 114,000 labels, and done validations of 108,000 of those labels. And we're working both in the city and then with several suburbs around the city. And so to explain what Project Sidewalk is, it's an online platform that uses online map imagery and a remote crowdsourcing interface to engage citizens and other participants in placing different kinds of user labels that then can get used by anyone through a public open interface. This is what the interface looks like and allows you to examine through the Google Street View interface the sidewalks and curb ramps by placing some of these different labels of what's in the infrastructure as well. So we see here broken sidewalk. We can zoom in and place what we call a surface problem label on that sidewalk. And then we show, and part of our training is show people how to rate these problems, rating the severity, the type of problem it is by placing these different tags, and then noting if it's temporary or not. The labels that are placed then, and part of the way the system works is then those labels become a map of accessibility in different neighborhoods or communities or sections of communities. So this is an example of all the labels placed in Ward 40, which is a small but decently sized ward in Chicago that used Project Sidewalk data to help prioritize what are called infrastructure menu funds that aldermanic districts have authority over. Project Sidewalk is national and international. It's in 4 continents, 8 countries, and 21 cities. And at this point is placed over 1 million labels around the world. And it's been used to make several different impacts, including new residential grant programs focused on sidewalk repair. This was from Newberg, Oregon, where advocates and residents mapped out a large portion of the city's sidewalks, and that helped to start this sidewalk redevelopment program. In Chicago, we've seen some good successes through working with aldermen and have seen prioritization and funding for improvements in Ward 3 and Ward 40. Those are kind of in the north side and mid-south side of Chicago. What sets Project Sidewalks apart is, communities often rely on requests, resident requests, but this fails to give you a holistic understanding, right, of the existing barriers. So in a sense, Project Sidewalk can provide an equitable approach to give decision makers that full picture of their community to better prioritize infrastructure. So this is an example in Ward 40. The blue dots are Ward 40 requests from citizens through, I think, the 311 system. And the red dots are what residents also placed in terms of problematic barriers with the sidewalks. And so, one of the things you could note is a different geography, right? A different pattern to what the data from Project Sidewalk shows compared to what the resident requests show. And then, of course, right, those are just some of the pieces. Other elements that you're probably thinking of in terms of prioritization are important to bring in here too, in terms of looking around schools, looking around healthcare centers, looking around transit, that you can bring in when you have this data as well. Another feature of Project Sidewalk is the visualization feature. So not only having like the plan view of the data from above, but also really having the contextual imagery to help illustrate what these different problems are. So we have different tools on the platform that help you visualize the data in different ways. This is Project Sidewalk Gallery that allows you to filter the data by type of label. Here showing missing curb ramps and the severity, tags, and whether their validations as well. Some considerations for deployment are, having this is a community engaged process, right? So having strong, active partners is important. City size matters, right? Very big cities will need to think about how they would do this. Often it works better for small and medium-sized cities, but then most of Seattle is done. So sometimes it's about incrementing in different neighborhoods. Understanding if there's a need for an inventory. I think it's important, and then it can help fill a gap for low resource communities that, at this point do not have any additional funds or maybe low staff ability to take this on. The presence and recency of Google Street View will be a consideration, right, in terms of how old the Google Street View data is. In the areas we're working with lately, it does vary, but in the Chicago area, we have data from December and October 2024. In a lot of other communities we're working with, it's 2022 to 2023. But that's an important consideration if your Google Street View data is older. We found that some seed funding can help with community organizing. So that the whole aspect of just holding events and being able to get people involved is important. These are some different deployment approaches. We can lead internally and just restrict it to specific people. You can work with community organizations. We have some curriculum that we've developed to work with schools We have some neat work that we are doing with service learning curriculum and workforce development curriculum for youth transition programs for students with disabilities. And these are a great way for students to gain service learning hours, or really engage in project-based learning that teaches them both about disability and accessibility, as well as urban planning topics. These are some frequently asked questions. I think I mentioned the recency of Google Street View. It takes about 45 to 55 minutes at first to do a mile of auditing. Then that can increase as you get better and better with it. We often have questions about how the data gets verified. Project Sidewalk has a validation interface, and then we've developed some different administrative validation tools to help in that process as well. What we do find, though, is that often communities want to go out in person, perhaps to some hotspots or high priority areas, to verify what they're seeing. I'll skip over these in the interest of time. They're just more about our curriculums, and just kind of end on this slide, which is just a kind of flow chart of how our process works overall, starting with reviewing the suitability, right, of Project Sidewalk, thinking of those factors I just mentioned, designing the deployment, meaning thinking about how you're going to engage partners or consider working with schools and youth programs. Could also be, after school programs as well. How you're going to organize training, so recruiting residents and advocacy groups to do that. We had some great success in the Chicago area recently by working with our Active Transportation Alliance, which is a regional active transportation group. And we put out a call for groups who wanted to work in their communities, and had I think over 100 applications. We had to choose like 10 to work with. We do provide training support from our team, so we can be part of those trainings to help in that initial learning. There's also a step of reviewing the initial data and providing feedback on areas of improvement, which we've found helps improve accuracy from crowd raters. So kind of a minor step, but one that really goes a long way to ensuring that crowd raters are rating correctly. And then we have those involved start to do the rating. We have different motivational tools on the platform, including a leaderboard that help to motivate people in doing the crowd rating. And we found that if you're, again, in a larger city, you might want to focus on a few of those at a time. And we have this validation approach that we talked about. And then from there, right, once the data is collected, this is an open, publicly available website, so you can download the data as CSVs, GeoJSONs, or shapefiles. And then we have several help guides for cleaning, filtering the data, as well as visualizing the data in platforms like ArcGIS or Google Earth. And then from there, right, it's the planning part, right? It's all the things that regional planners and city planners know how to do well, to take that data and start to look at it in relation to all other kinds of data to identify priorities and to develop ADA transition plans. So that's the kind of big process as a whole. I'm not too far over time or on time. But here's my contact information, a little bit about our projects. There's a few websites here. Accessiblecommunities.org is our website that kind of explains how Project Sidewalk works and gets you to our different curriculum and news. And then the projectsidewalk.org is the main platform itself. And then our ADA transition plan research and resources are at the last link there as well. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. We already have some questions here in the chat. So I'm gonna just see the first sort of set of questions are from Nicholas that are a bit related to how the platform functions. Nicholas, if you're on here, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
No.
Okay, I'm not hearing from Nicholas. If you are trying to talk, you are on mute. Are you there?
Define label, request, and validation.
Oh, okay, I see that. Yes. So a label is the kind of typology that we call for the different features of the pedestrian infrastructure. So there's a label for a curb ramp, a label for a missing sidewalk, a label for crosswalk. That's what the user kind of plays with in the interface. I don't know that I used the word request, but validation is part of our approach to ensuring some quality control, right? Some quality checking of the data. So we have both what we call exploration missions, which take you on a brief, sometimes half a block to a block, what we call missions. And then we have validation mission, which gets you to review 10 labels that another user has placed.
Great. And Nicholas, I saw you had another question too related to how the tool works. I don't know if you want to ask the that one as well about the Street View car.
I go by Nick.
Nick.
First, what information needs to be inputted before opening up the tool to the public?
Sure. So, I think if you look at the flow chart that I had in the second to last slide, gives you a sense of some of the steps that would need to be done, and kind of thinking about that suitability. One of the things we do, our development team at University of Washington, they have a tool for looking at and analyzing the recency of Google Street View. I could see if I can pull up a link that I could share out later on with Liza and Ellen, but it'll show you like the mean year of the data and from Google Street View, and kind of the distribution of the panoramas from Google Street View in your city, and then from there, if it looks good, that our development team, all they need is a shape file for the boundary of the area that you want to start collecting data in. And then, again, kind of thinking about these other approaches of you have an engaged group as well.
Will you be acting as a consultant?
Well, no, in our case right now, we're still we're not a profit. We're, as part of our work in the university, and then as we were a federally funded grant. So part of this all this is still free and open to the public. Some of the funds help on the community side for community engagement, but our systems don't require any funding.
The other question I had was, if the Google Street View car drove on the far side of the street, how does it get a good view of the sidewalks on the other side?
Yeah, that's a great technical question. So sometimes what we find is the Google Street View car will like go both directions. So we'll have kind of two paths that someone will use, or if it is that you can't see, or sometimes there's in more urban areas, right, like too many cars are blocking the sidewalk, we have one of the labels that's can't view, which means that that part of the street, that part of the sidewalk wouldn't be able to be labeled.
Okay.
For your questions.
Excellent. We have time for maybe just one more quick question that focuses a bit more on governance and how different cities function. Jeffrey, if you're on the call, do you want to share your question? I'm not hearing Jeffrey. I can also just read it out as well.
Oh, sorry, I
So,
didn't have
oh, go ahead.
my, okay. So anyway, I'm wondering if your approach changes if you're working with a city that funds sidewalk maintenance versus a city that makes it the responsibility of the property owner.
Yeah, no, our system kind of stays the same. I think it all varies in terms of how a community or MPO might want to use it and make the data available. I think that's a important question in terms of the remediation pieces, right, and the methods for barrier removal, the various kinds of programs that you would develop once you have the data. And I think one of the interesting things that I think can happen is that once that data is collected, right, once you get an idea of the distribution and severity of the problems, it might help rethink those different types of policies. And I know there are some cities, I'm thinking of Denver, who kind of changed how sidewalk maintenance happens, right? When they moved that from the property owner to being the responsibility of the city. So yeah, I think from a law perspective, I could clarify this just to confirm, but I think from a law perspective, a city can still get sued if we're looking at that part, no matter what approach they take to maintenance. I hope that helps. Thanks.
All right. So we do have one more question, but I might, for the sake of time, ask if you, Dr. Eisenberg, can try and respond in the chat.
Sure. Yep, definitely.
So it looks like there's one from Rhea and then another one just got popped in from Jen. So if you're able to respond to those in the chat to everybody, that would be great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thanks.
All right, let's move on to James and David's presentation. And go ahead and share your screen whenever you're ready.
All right, well, Dave's loading it. I will offer apologies to anybody who was at the last Tools and Training Symposium in Albuquerque. This is going to look pretty familiar, but still relevant and maybe a good refresher for those who've already seen it. So we're going to talk about what we did for some sidewalk data collection and basically some automated assessment for ADA ProAg compliance. So this is going slow. Okay, there we go. So just to give some context, a lot of people have heard of New York City, all the way down there at the bottom of the map. New York State's pretty wide and varied. GTC covers a 9-county area in Western New York. Within that, we're focused on here. I think it's 188 municipalities. So we got a big area to cover. The shaded area in the middle is our urban core. What would typically be the metropolitan planning area in most places, but when we were defined a full 9-county area. You'll see over to the northeast is Wayne County, and within Wayne County is a town alliance. But several years ago, there's the Village Alliance, and you can see up in the upper right corner the little gray square in the red box. So the village was established in 1854, but in 2015, the community decided to dissolve the village as a separate government, and then everything was absorbed into the surrounding town. In essence, the former village that functioned as the downtown, the civic center, is now like downtown of the town. The areas of responsibility that had been under the village government have reverted to the town, including the infrastructure. The current town supervisor is somebody that previously was the public works director for the county and worked as a civil engineer. So his mindset was kind of like, hey, there's an opportunity here, and he was aware of GTC having served on our committees for a while. So he reached out to us for some technical assistance to evaluate the sidewalk conditions because the town was going to need to prioritize how do they make improvements. So we do include in our Unified Planning Work Program local technical assistance, and every year we try to identify a small project we could do in-house with our staff, not need consultants. And in 2023, the town supervisor did approach me, and we said, yeah, we could do something. And our new UPWP went into effect April 2023. We ran into some staff changes where in May of 23, the person was going to went to the private sector in Canada. And then we brought somebody on board, and they did a lot of the work in the fall, and then they ended up leaving, and now Dave has taken over the project to put a bow on it. So really the purpose is to assist the town with a data collection and assessment, and then trying to give them something that they can use to prioritize their sidewalk improvements, say over 5, 10, or 15 year, in essence, a capital improvement program for their sidewalks. And they do have money set aside in their budgets to do some, and then they would look for grant opportunities using this information. 2023, many of you know ProAg was updated, so we want to incorporate that. We realized, the traditional method of going out with a smart level tape measure, it's a very time-consuming process. So we were open to looking at other ideas of how do we do this. We didn't want to, it wasn't for a funded project, so we could still keep it at concept level, planning level, we thought. And you think about the different types of ways you could do the data collection. The traditional way of the manual, smart levels, tape measure, spot checks, you get very labor intensive. You still have to have, crunch numbers, do some analysis. And if you think about it, it's like, oh, go 50 feet down the sidewalk or 100 feet down the sidewalk, and you're taking spot checks. You're not getting continuous coverage. But then you could say, oh, well, we're following that rubric, but in between we can flag some problem areas. Next step up would be technology assisted, use things like smartphone or drones or a data bike. Even some of what Dr. Eisenberg was talking about, where you're crowdsourcing some stuff and using the technology. It'll help with the data collection. You still have to have some post-processing. Then, at the high end would be fully automated. And that would help you use, imagery, whether you have aerial imagery, you're using drone footage, or using Google Street View, whatever you're using. It makes it a little easier to pull the data out, but the condition assessment is a little challenging sometimes. So what Liza's question earlier, talking about, the extent of the coverage versus the condition, the automated, a vehicle driving down the street is going to help know where they are. But, the big takeaway is there's different methods. They require different tools, different sets of knowledge, and different budgets. So we're going to focus on a technology assisted. There are tools out there that would take advantage of smartphones, tablets, cameras, GPS, LiDAR, GIS tools. So that really comes into data collection. You still have to go out. Somebody still has to physically go out there and collect the data. Coincidentally, at the 2023 AMPO conference, we learned about Deep Walk. And Deep Walk is a tool that uses the LiDAR capabilities within an iPhone or an iPad, the newer models, and scans it, and their data, the post-processing they do back at their shop will analyze the LiDAR data and automatically search for compliance with ProAg, compliance with ADA, or conflicts with. And so we talked to them, and we did a pilot project to try to understand what was going on. And this was something that, at least in 2023, they were offering to communities. I don't know if they're still offering it, but we want to assess if this is usable in our region. So this is some pictures of Charlie, who was on our team at the time. You can see the upper left. He's literally holding an iPhone walking down the sidewalk. It is scanning something like 200 dots per inch kind of thing. Yeah, it's a really intense coverage. But literally, you just walk down at a steady pace, holding the phone. So the grip he's got in the upper left is just to be more comfortable holding the phone and holding it steady. And now move it over to Dave to talk about some of the products and deliverabilities.
Yeah, so the products that kind of come out of Deepwalk from there, they do a really good job on the processing, and they kind of create a point cloud, with the LiDAR data that you've collected and the imagery to create essentially like a little mini aerial. If you've ever done any drone footage and LiDAR data collection, this probably looks very similar. But what the product that you get out of it is essentially a panel by panel analysis, which is really quite in depth. And we're looking at cross slope, running slope, and clear width, all from this data. And then they put it into a nice little web package there, and they have the web app where they kind of go through and they do a composite score for sidewalk accessibility, which has different weights according to the components, and it gives you a good general sense right there, that composite score of what you're dealing with. Then, when you want to get into kind of the details there on each panel, it'll go through and identify, what the faults were of those areas, and whether or not there's an obstruction, a cross slope issue, or whatnot for each area. So another product that you can get out of this is an Esri ArcGIS package. There's an integration with ArcGIS Online, which allows the data to kind of be brought over into feature layers, web map, and an embedded instant app that you can use for sharing. So you can do whatever you want with it at that point when it's in ArcGIS Online, and that can be creating a story map if you wanted to. There you can also pull the data out as a GeoJSON, and they do have reports, PDF reports for each segment as well, which will give you the imagery and then how the composite score and the issues that we're seeing at each location. And here's kind of an example of the scans of the imagery that you would get in those reports. So as you click on each segment, you'll get what's kind of going on there. So here we can see some issues with ramps that were pointed out. The instant app, so again, this is going to be the ArcGIS Online output that you can kind of get from it. And again, you can go ahead and share this, but the layers that you have available to you are displayed there. And you can see the curb ramps, for instance, major, minor, moderate barriers to access found, and level of deterioration, or just if it's okay. I found a lot of utility in kind of the PDF auto reports that were there. It's a nice feature just to kind of go through and, hey, here's the segment, and here are the things that are pointed out for each one, whether or not it's an issue with cross slope, and then you can go through and check those in person again if you do need to do an additional detailed analysis. But again, this is static, so you do lose the interactability, but it's a good resource to have. So I've generally been able to pull those reports down. Deepwalk does host those, initially, and they provide a link out to them, but you can download all the reports if you wish. So, I think this one I'm passing back over to Jim.
Coming back to the summary. So, we did go through it pretty quick. I think that one of the things that's really kind of amazing, so that PDF report, that picture of the corner, and you saw the grass and the sidewalk and the road, and that's all from a phone 4 feet off the ground. So it's pretty amazing what the imagery comes back as from the LiDAR. Pretty powerful visual. So getting into the positives, the strengths, more data collected in the same amount of time. If you compare to going out and doing the smart level and the tape measure, and on a curb ramp, you've got to do 2 points, and then down the sidewalk, you got to do points. You get a lot more data in the same amount of time, field time, essentially staff time because you're sending it off for the AI processing. Charlie was able to do the walking, the initial data collection, and then had to go out and do some rescans. There was places where the data quality was like, oh, there's a challenge. And that's one of the things that Deep Walk does before they crunch the data, they screen for data quality. If you can imagine a puddle, well, LiDAR doesn't penetrate water, so you're not going to get, you're not going to know what's there. We were out there in October and November. I think it was November. There's leaves on the ground. If there's too much leaf coverage, you're not going to get good readings. So there were some rescans, but I think in total, he did a little over 5 miles in 10 hours of field time. So it's very efficient in that regard. The other thing is you got one person out there. We had somebody go out and take pictures of them, so we did have a second person out there for a little while. But if you think about, a lot of the instructions on, a state DOT will give it a procedure for going out and doing the sidewalk, where you're going to have somebody measuring, somebody recording, somebody watching out for oncoming traffic. So you got at least 3 people out there. So you significantly cut down on your staff time. The idea of, as Dave mentioned, the panel by panel analysis, that's just not practical if you're going out there and manually checking things. And you get that comprehensive data. It was probably hard to see on the screen, but within those pages, the PDF, there was statistics. What's the maximum run slope? What's the minimum run slope? What's the average? Same thing with cross slope. Same thing, and it was identify where's the driveways, where are the curb cuts, where is vegetation overgrown, and those things, are built into that. It was really interesting. They came up out of the Chicago area. It might even have been University of Illinois, Chicago, because Dr. Eisenberg said he knows some of the crew there. But they were doing a lot of Midwest cities, a lot of much younger cities, and concrete, steady sidewalk. In that village, like I said, it goes back to 1854. There's still slabs of slate out there. So they got to see quite a variety of materials and quite a variety of terrain. So they said it helped their learning model a bit. It's easily to share. Again, the cross slope, the run slope, the clear width on every panel. Does it meet PROAG? Does it meet ADA? And honestly, it's like a 20-minute online tutorial to learn how to use the tool before you go out and use it. So that is really good with the strengths and the positives. There are limitations though. It could over-identify the barriers to access. It might, the data might be too crowded, might get a little overwhelmed. So you still need to double check things in the field. The differentiation between sidewalk segments and curb ramps can be a challenge at times because it's point features and line features. It kind of goes back and forth. Where you have the landing areas at the top and the bottom of the curb ramps are not considered, at least in this iteration. Maybe in the future they will. And it's one of the big changes with PROAG was the terrain, where under ADA you had to meet the slope no matter what. The PROAG gives you a little flexibility in that regard. So it doesn't do a good job of discerning, okay, well, it doesn't meet ADA run slope, but it might satisfy PROAG due to the terrain. And I don't think there's a way to really automate that, considering you're working in a very flat area or a very hilly area. It can make a difference. When there's vertical displacement between panels, if it's raised up an inch or whatever, you have to tag it on the map. Like in the app, as you're walking, you could tag it. Oh, problem area, problem area. It's not precise enough to measure the lift. And the PROAG, that's the parameters. There's no deviation from that, so it's a little bit confining sometimes. the other challenge you'll have when there's wide sidewalks in some areas, particularly downtown areas, you have to do a little sweeping motion, so you have to walk even slower, but they don't want you to walk back the other way. It really confuses the data. But yeah, the bottom line, we saw this as a positive for us, cost-effective way to get some coverage. I think on a use case and some of the stuff that Dr. Eisenberg was showing where, hey, you're crowdsourcing maybe some of the problem areas and then you maybe go out with this tool to get more precise. We did have the opportunity by chance that the state DOT was doing a project in that on one of the sidewalk sections we walked. So in their early, before they even do design, they have to go out and assess like, oh, where might we have the ADA stuff. They have to look at the sidewalk environment. And so we were able to compare. And what they told us, well, it's not satisfactory for what they need to do for all the documentation that goes into a construction project. It was a reasonable tool to do some initial screening. So at an MPO level, that makes a lot of sense. We're going to identify where there might be challenges, and then the agency implementing the project could take it further. We'll probably use it some more. Probably not in the city of Rochester where they have between 600 and 700 miles of sidewalk. That would get really cost prohibitive, but small areas, village centers, different things, I think there's opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you both for that. I see a couple questions in the chat. I also want to just remind everyone, feel free to raise your hand, and I can call on you directly as well. As you are raising your hand, I'm going to just draw us to, I'm going to call on Susan since we haven't heard from her. Susan had a question in here. If you're on, Susan, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I was just wondering if Genesee had any thoughts on measuring the vertical gap using Deep Walk?
So Deep Walk won't flag it automatically, but as the person walking down the sidewalk, they have the opportunity to basically put a marker into the data collection in the app and say, hey, flag this area. Again, for planning purpose, you would say, hey, there's a vertical displacement there. And then when the agency that's going to do the sidewalk repair would go out and further assess, sometimes it's being lifted by a tree root, or there's some settlement on a panel and you could do mud jacking. So all we're able to do is manually tag and say, hey, here's something for further investigation.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and we had one more in the chat from Nick, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Is there a recommended frequency for these intensive assessments?
I'm not aware of any recommended. It's sort of, responding to an identified need. The other thing to keep in mind is that sidewalks tend to deteriorate very slowly. So I don't think that it's unreasonable to go 10 years between a review, unless you're in an area that's got some real issues. But you're going to identify those areas for other reasons. I think once a sidewalk starts to really crumble, you're not going to wait on it. It's time to repair that. But by and large, even in a Northeast city, our sidewalks are not changing nearly or deteriorating nearly as rapidly as roads and bridges. So they last a long time.
All right, thank you both. Ellen, do you want to wrap us up with pointing people to those links in the chat?
Sure. Thank you so much to our speakers, to Jim, David, and Yochai. We appreciate all this information you shared. This was really, really interesting, and I saw some great feedback in the chat. So I think a lot of folks got a lot out of this. Thank you to Liza for pulling this together. We could not put on these webinars without our interest group leaders who are all volunteers. So thank you, Liza, for identifying this great topic and the speakers to share with us. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Hope to see you at future webinars down the road, and also a reminder about that listening session that we're having tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern. Hope you can join us there if you want to learn more about just what's going on in terms of federal transportation issues and share what you're hearing as well. So hope you have a great rest of your day.